Good morning, net builders. Thank you guys for joining us again for yet another amazing episode. This one a little more different than what we usually do, but probably probably the most valuable episode that we'll ever have here. We're gonna get into law, specifically immigration law. And we have Tahmina Watson here today in Seattle, and she is going to help us understand a lot of the difficult questions that we have so we're not just doing what we think should be done because Google told us to. So I'm going to hand the floor over to you, Tamina, and can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much, RJ Stewart, for having me. I'm so grateful. I'm an immigration attorney in Seattle, Washington. My law firm is Watson Immigration Law. And I loved hearing the story about how you started this show, because that's exactly how I came to start speaking about what I do and writing about what I do. So as an immigration attorney, I help primarily businesses with business immigration needs. And so that's either recruiting talent, foreign talent. I'm helping people who are starting their businesses or investing in businesses. I do also help family members. So that's a parent, child, spouse applications. I help people with their citizenship applications. But I also do a lot of community work in helping the community in the needs that arise from time to time. The last 4 years is an example of really just being, thrown into the deep end. And, I'm glad we're not there, but there's a lot of like after effects of the last 4 years. So we're on a lot of pro bono work in the community, but my day job is really helping with business immigration primarily.
Outstanding, outstanding. I love how philanthropic you are too. That's I mean, we need more people like that who are willing to give back to the community and do for others. Because it's this I think this last year, the year of the COVID has like it's either it's either made or break made or broke a lot of people. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's good to have people like you still here, you know?
Well, thank you. I'm trying. I'm trying my best.
So what really, I mean, you've mentioned a little bit about how you got into immigration law, but I'm really curious, like what really made you get choose that law? Because as I understand, you can specialize in numerous different things.
That's correct. And in fact, I did not want to be an immigration lawyer. And
Oh,
if you've tuned into my accent, I'm not originally from here. I was born and raised in London. And then I got married to an American. It's a long story short. I got married to an American. And then I had to go through the immigration um, process myself to live here, work here, eventually become a citizen. So I went through the green card application. And once I got my green card, I had to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I was a lawyer in the UK, a barrister, as they call them. And in fact, the word barrister didn't mean anything in this country until George Clooney married one. So now I can actually say barrister and hope people understand me. So I don't make coffee, I practice law. And so when I got my green card, I had to figure out, how do I become a lawyer again? And I took the New York bar exams while I live in Washington State. And you can practice federal laws in any part of the country. And immigration happens to be a federal area of law because the law applies to everybody anywhere in the country in the same way. And so immigration kept following me around as a job, and I didn't want it because I grew up thinking immigration was just asylum law. It was just going to pull at my, heartstrings. Um, and when it eventually landed on my lap for the third time, I thought, I'll just do this for a few years. And then I'll wave in to Washington State, and then I'll do whatever I want. And at the time, I thought it would be litigation. But day one of immigration, I loved it. I had no idea it could be so much more than just asylum. And in fact, I don't practice asylum law much at all. I filed, a good number of them, but only for the cases that I really pick and choose. But I really realized that I'm good at business immigration law. When you run your own business, you understand all the pain points that come with running a business. You have to pay your taxes on time. You need your license renewed on time. You need an entity. You have to do payroll. You have to think about how to get those cases, or the business and the marketing and the HR. And what I realized is my clients who are coming to me, who are running their own businesses and needed to find the talent, I could relate to them in a way that was much more effective than other people. And that's how I fell into it. And over time, I've become really good at it. And I very much want to help the people who are starting businesses with visions that other people don't have, but they know they can change the world. And so that really led to writing about that issue a lot, blogging about it, and eventually writing a book about it.
Outstanding. Outstanding. And it's so I have my wife, she's originally from Lagos, Nigeria, and she's working on bringing her mom here right now. So we're going through that whole painful process. So I imagine when her mom gets here, I know it's going to be like the happiest moment of her life. So I can't wait for that day. But for you to be able to do that almost on a daily basis for people is amazing. Reuniting people with work visas here with their families, to get their families here, and them to just be together again. That's, you're kind of like a fairy tale maker, I guess.
Oh,
No?
I love that. I'm going to have to quote you on that, but I do feel like it's a feel-good area of law, because when, the moment that I realized I am really changing somebody's life is when I had that very first call in my early days from somebody who was beaten up by her US citizen husband, black and blue, and I eventually got her a green card. And when I said, your green card is here, and we're on the phone, she screamed in my phone, in my ear. I had to drop the phone because I thought I was going to be deaf. But that moment where I'm still getting goosebumps talking about it, I really made a difference in somebody's life. That I don't know where she is. I'm not in contact with her, but I know she's doing okay. She's a citizen likely at this point, and she's safely here. And so that reuniting or giving security and stability to somebody is so rewarding. And what I say to people is, I'm dealing with the most important things in people's lives, their livelihood or their loved ones. And even though it's a happy area of law, as I call it, it's not always a happy process, but you have to go through it and really understand and hold their hands tightly in giving them the patience, because you're sort of in a black hole sometimes. We're in that right now with COVID. Nothing is moving, but to have that reassurance that somebody who knows what they're doing and they can give you that comfort is rewarding and is precious to the client. And so we go out of our way to make sure we communicate and make them understand why the paperwork we need is necessary, why the delay is happening, and why we can't do much about it. Just because you have a lawyer doesn't mean I'm a miracle maker. I can't push the government in opening their offices, something that's happening at the moment. But I love what I do. And I'm very grateful that I'm in this position to make a difference.
Outstanding. Outstanding. So I have a couple of questions for you.
Okay, bring it on.
Okay. So has it been more difficult now to get work visas than in the past? I mean, of course, you have the factor of the whole COVID thing and all of that stuff, but let's minus the COVID, that whole situation. Has it been more difficult to get work visas now than it has been?
Really good question. So we sort of need to look back in time a little. And when we look at the last 4 years, between 2016 and 2020, it gradually became very difficult to get work visas. It's not that cases weren't always approved, but there was the highest denial rate that we'd seen ever, because the previous administration was really trying to find roadblocks in denying cases. So it was harder. But what we have seen, and I wish I could take COVID out of the picture, but we can't, because what has happened is there's an after effect of the last 4 years, compounded by the troubles of COVID. So what we heard from the new DHS, Department of Homeland Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas, sort of a few months ago when he went into office, he said the entire immigration system has been gutted. So not only were we seeing denials, slowly they were just removing the fundamental infrastructure of the immigration system. And so when we fast forward the clock to 2021, January, a new administration comes in, they're left with a system that was already broken but torn apart completely, then hammered by the problems of COVID. And so it's difficult in the sense that I think cases are likely going to be approved more going forward with less questions asked. I hope. We haven't seen that happen yet, but I hope. But the bigger problem is there's not enough manpower to push things through. And so when we send a case, instead of taking 2 or 3 weeks to hear back, it's now taking several weeks, 6 weeks, 2 months, 4 months to hear back that we've got your case. It used to be relatively simple. Somebody in the mailroom would open the packet, put the check in one place and file in another. We don't have that luxury anymore. And that has a domino effect on all the other things that need to happen. So it's a very challenging time. And so what is important for your listeners and viewers to understand is COVID truly has had an impact, both inside the US, but also outside the US. So let's say you might have hired somebody on an H-1B visa, the most popular work visa, and you got the approval here in the US. And that person, let's say, is sitting in Europe waiting to come here. What we saw last year is that Trump had banned new H-1B visa holders from getting visas. So that ban eventually was lifted by Biden, President Biden. But what has happened since is there's a country ban between the US and Europe, the Schengen area. And so even though now he could in theory get an H-1B visa, he simply cannot get permission to come into the US because that country is now banned. So we are now going through, I wrote an article recently, your viewers and listeners should follow me on a national platform called Above the Law. And I wrote an article called Visa Ban versus Country Ban. And so up until the visa bans were lifted, we had to go through, is it a visa ban or a country ban or both? But now we have to go through country ban, and what do we have to do to get in? Most of the embassies around the world, and you might see this with your mother-in-law's situation, is that the embassies are closed. They're open for limited amount of times, and even then you can't get an appointment. And so there are challenges on top of challenges, and it's truly affecting businesses in the US. So we're hoping to see some relaxing of this in the near future, but the challenges are just sort of compounded on top of each other. So my day job, I call it my day job because I'm writing a book and doing a podcast and doing other things. It's not any easier than the last 4 years, but I sleep a little bit better knowing I don't have to wake up to a tweet that's going to put me and my clients in a tizzy.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. And thank you for not factoring out COVID when you spoke about that, because you're right, you couldn't have done that. Like that would, I think that would have destroyed the answer, for lack of better terms.
It's simply not possible because we have so many challenges.
Yeah.
And the goalpost changes. For example, when the initial restrictions were put in for country bans, they said all of these visas, you cannot come in, people. But if you have this exception or that exception, you can still come in. But what they did with the exceptions, they said, we're going to make the exception like this now. So that means a lot of people just can't come in. But then just yesterday, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, had made some changes. And now the question that we're getting from clients and listeners and viewers is, hey, does this change my situation in coming in? And the answer is no. The country situation hasn't changed. So it's the goalpost is moving in some directions and other directions, but they don't always move at the same time. And so we
Gotcha.
really have to keep an eye on what's going on.
It sounds like a Rubik's cube. It's like I'm
Yes, I'm going to quote you on so many. It really is a Rubik's cube.
like I
Yeah,
finally got all the reds over here, but I can't get these over here.
love it. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I'm going to quote you when I post that picture.
Okay, so for the people that are here with their H1s, and you have them here right now, are for businesses, are audits more frequent, for H1s and I9s now? Like, is it more frequent now here?
That's a really good question. And not a lot of people have asked me that. And just so your viewers and my listeners can all understand, the I-9 is a form that is compulsory to fill out for businesses who are employing people. And they've got to do it for everybody, no matter what. But when you're hiring somebody, you've got to, as part of that process, check their identification and their work status. And so that's what the I-9 is. And then often the Department of Labor or the government, the USCIS, they could come and try to do an I-9 audit. And I haven't heard of a lot of audits recently. And what the audit means, just so your listeners can understand, it means that the government will come into your business and say, hey, we want to check your I-9 files. Thank you very much. And then you have 3 days to respond. And you only have 3 days to really get everything in order. And that means that all the boxes are checked and your paperwork is in order, and every little thing that is wrong, you will be fined for those. But if you have hired somebody knowingly that they do not have permission to work, that's when you as a business owner, could actually get into trouble. It could be higher fines, there could be criminal implications too. It can go, quite down the road. I haven't heard of any I-9 audits recently. It doesn't mean it's not happening, but it's likely less frequent at the moment simply because COVID, because this is something where the agent has to come to your office,
Mm.
look, but people are working remotely. Even if you have a business, you're not necessarily in your office. And so there are challenges of you coming into the office and doing the paperwork and the agent coming into your office. So I don't know if they're as frequent at the moment. But what I will say is, if you do, make sure that your I-9 process is squeaky clean, because once you have that call and that audit request, you really don't have a lot of time. So self-auditing is a good practice to have.
Gotcha. Now, is that self-auditing, is that usually a service that is offered, that you could hire someone to come in and, do a pre-audit just in case that
That's a,
situation arises?
yeah, that's a really good question. Some lawyers do offer that. Where you sort of go in and look at all. I mean, I've done it for some of my existing clients, where we sort of go in and say, well, let's look at this and look at that, and let's see what we can fix and what have you. But yes, it's good practice. What happens with those forms also is there's a timeline in which you must fill out those things. So if you are a business owner, you should definitely understand the timelines in which you must complete those forms. Because even if you do a self audit 3 years later with that employee, it's your comfort level, but that could still put you in trouble, that you didn't check their identification, like, until 2 years later.
Oh,
That's going to put you in trouble. So it's really important and USCIS, the Immigration Service, and they have, I-9 information. The instructions, are not terribly difficult to understand. So just make your own checklist. Make your own checklist that I've got to do this and I've got to do this and got to do this. And then once you have a system, you don't necessarily need to do an audit of yourself. So it's about maintaining starting something well. But if you do need to do that, yes, find yourself somebody to help you, or you could do it on your own. Figure out these are the 5 files out of my 200 that need help. Let's go and talk to a lawyer about those 5 files. What do I do?
Okay. Okay. Great advice, actually. Thank you. Very, very great advice.
You're welcome.
Um,
Yes.
so
Yeah, it's a question that not a lot of people ask me. I'm so glad you asked that.
I'm trying to think from a business person's point of view. I'm a single member LLC, so I don't have to worry about hiring. But these these podcasts, like we talked about earlier, they're not necessarily for me, but I love getting the knowledge. But there's people out there that never thought to answer that question, or are probably digging a hole right now that they don't
Yeah.
even know that they're digging. But maybe what you just said just triggered something in their head, like, oh man, maybe I should do self audits, or you know,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
could be one day from getting a message from an auditor right now, and the information you just provided just gave them a heads up of what to fix.
Yeah, well, listeners, if you benefit, let RJ Stewart know, because I think it'll be interesting to see how many people didn't know about this, and so that you can have that data to, share as necessary, or just know that this is something that maybe I should even talk about more, because I really don't.
I appreciate it a bunch. So on a in a in a perfect world, what does the process of becoming a citizen look like?
In a perfect world, and let's take your mother-in-law as an example. Let's say she actually gets here. You've definitely gone through challenges yourself. You probably had to fill out a lot of forms. You had to figure out where to file it, how much money to pay them, was the check written out properly, all of these things. I've seen trouble with, different people. And then you've probably waited a long time to even get an initial approval. And wherever you are in that process, what will happen is you'll get other tasks sent to you by an agency called National Visa Center. And their job is to send the file to the embassy. And by the time the embassy actually calls your mother-in-law for an interview, which could be 2 years from the time you've even begun, and maybe even longer now because of COVID, she'll eventually have an interview where she has to prove, yes, I'm a good person, I didn't commit crimes, yes, this is my daughter, and she'll eventually come to the US, arrive here as a green card holder. And once she gets here, she'll have 5 years. Um, the eligibility timeline is 5 years. So if you have been a green card holder for 5 years or more, for most people, then you can apply for citizenship, fill out another form, pay more money, and wait a significant amount of time. Right now, it's more than 2 years to have an interview where you will pledge an oath to America, but also answer some civic questions. Who's the president? And there's 100 questions you have to learn, but only get 6 right. And then somebody becomes a citizen. Now, if you get a green card through most means, it's a 5-year timeline. But if you get a green card through marriage to a US citizen, then that timeline is reduced to 3 years. If you get a green card through marriage and then you continue to be married, at the end of 3 years, you can apply for citizenship. At that point, you have to prove that you've continued to be married and it's a bona fide relationship on top of the other things. And so that's the only criteria as category of people for 3 years. Everybody else, whether you get a green card through asylum or work or parent or child or whatever, it's a 5-year timeline.
Perfect. Thank you for breaking that down for me. I've always that was probably more for me than everyone else. Sorry, guys, I'm being selfish today, but I really wanted to know that. So
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. The thing is that anything that you and I want to know, chances are most people want to know. And so I listen to so many podcasts, but I always hear that if you're listening to this message is for you too. And so I'm so glad you're asking these very important questions.
definitely. So I do a lot of coding, a lot of computer coding, and I can type down 5,000 lines and go and click the button to run the program. Then I get an error. And after going through these 5,000 lines, the process is called debugging. Going through these 5,000 lines, I'll find out that the whole program of 5,000 lines is ruined now because of a comma misplaced. And then, you know, that's about 6 hours of doing this to figure out that this comma is ruining everything. I want to know, I think my question, I say that to ask this. In the process of citizenship, is there anything to stop you if you make a mistake in step 2? Can you get to step 5, or do they stop you at step 2? Does that make
Now
sense?
I'm sitting here thinking, wow, you're asking some amazing questions that people have not asked me before. The answer is sometimes you can't go back. And you often don't know the mistake has happened at step 2 until you got to step 7.
Oh man.
And when you got that far and this problem has occurred, you can't go back in time. The most common situation in which this problem happens is when somebody is out of their immigration status. So let's say you are in the US and you had a visa, let's say to work, okay? And suddenly your visa permit to work has expired and you don't know. Either you didn't pay attention or there was some mistake somewhere and you didn't notice. From that day, let's call it January 1, your work permit had expired, but you didn't know. January 2nd, you continue to work. Nobody knows any different. You continue to work. Suddenly, July 1st, you're like, oh goodness, I now need to, oh, you have to renew your visa. And so you start applying for renewal, and that's when you catch this problem that you have had this 6 months of working without permission. Now you can't go back in time and fix it, but working without permission is a huge no-no. You are now illegally in the US and you have now accumulated or accruing what's called unlawful presence. Now, when you apply for that renewal, the government, unless you have a really good reason, which, most of the time, nobody has a good reason, you're not going to get that approved. So at that point, and I'm only talking 6 months at this moment, July 1, the question will be, how do I fix it? In that situation, you could apply to the government and beg for forgiveness. They will likely take another 6 months to look at your case. Now you've got 12 months
Oh wow.
of presence. This is important because 0 to 6 months of no status means that you can still leave the country and come back. There's no legal bar from you coming back. Somebody may or may not let you in, but legally speaking, you're still allowed to come back. But when you're in the US without status between 6 months and 12 months, and you leave the country, you cannot come back for 3 years. And when you're in the country for 12 months or more without status, inadvertent or knowingly happening, you leave the country, you cannot come back for 10 years. So the immigration reform debate you hear all the time about these 11 million undocumented people is because they had come in without status already, but they let that unlawful status accumulate for 12 months or more. And so when you hear people say, go back to your country, come back legally, they simply cannot legally come back in because legally speaking, they have a big wall that they can't jump across. So the immigration reform debate is about taking down that barrier and creating a pathway so that they can come back legally. So the debate people hear all the time, go back and come back legally, get in line. There's no line. So that's one example of you can't fix it. Now, the 11 million undocumented people, a lot of people knowingly got into that problem, but a lot of people unknowingly get into that problem. And that's when you cannot come and fix it. The other scenario in which this could happen is, I help a lot of people, and let's take somebody who's like your mother-in-law, let's just say, and they're getting their green card. Now we've been waiting for 18 months, for the paperwork to happen. And now let's say the person has gone to the interview. Now, let's say the person, and let's just take your mother-in-law as an example, because it's just, a ripe example. Let's say she said she thinks that she didn't need to tell me something. Let's say she came to the US and she committed a crime, let's say. She has a conviction. Let's say she didn't tell me about it. Now she's at the interview, and the officers, immigration knows everything. They can find out anything and everything. I have to rely on my clients telling me, but the immigration officer can find out. Now, on the paperwork, I might have said no criminal convictions, because that's a question on the forms. Because she didn't tell me, I asked her, and now
there's no penalty for you as a lawyer, right? For that?
Most of the time, no.
Okay.
Sometimes, but I'm signing my life away too, saying I am knowingly, pledging that this is all true to my. But I've not seen a lawyer necessarily be, charged with something problematic. There have been some issues, a different story for a different time. But coming back to this story of what would happen to somebody like your mom who goes to the interview, we've said no to the criminal conviction. Now they have the interview, and at the interview, they say, did you shoplift that thing for $10? And the person says, no, I didn't do that. And then they'll be like, well, here's the paperwork. We know that you committed this crime. Now you cannot go back and turn that clock, back, because now two problems have happened. Now she has lied to get an immigration benefit, and she has misrepresented. And now she cannot come back. But it could have been that $10 thing that happened might have not been a problem for getting the green card.
Yeah.
It could have been like in a conviction in their own country. You have to go through a criminal charge would have a lot of analysis. Is this something that prevents somebody from coming in? Is this a petty offense, what's called in immigration petty offense, less than 6 months of, charge and just a fine? It's not the end of the world. Or is it, you've killed somebody? Those analysis have to happen. But some of these don't cause problems in a green card. But if you haven't told me, I can't solve it. And now you can't go back in time and fix it. So these, your step 2 problem showing up at step 6 can happen in immigration quite often. Sometimes you can say sorry. Most of the times you cannot.
It's just very dependent. But for the most part, it sounds like a pretty forgiving system.
For the most part, it's an unforgiving system.
Oh, very unforgiving?
Yeah, because what they say is you lied to get an immigration benefit. Therefore, we are not going to give you this visa. Now, if that happens, let's say there's a scenario of somebody like your mother-in-law who didn't tell them something and they found out and they've denied, they said, we're not going to give this to you. Then you can file a waiver saying, I'm really sorry, I lied to you. But if you don't let me in, my immediate relative, my parent will suffer, US citizen or green card holder, please let me in. In that situation, you can say sorry, and there's a mechanism for saying sorry, but the bar is very, very high. And more often than not, they're denied. And so while there is a mechanism and there's a process, you cannot rely on it. So what I say to my clients, you've got to maintain all of these things, very carefully, and do not omit anything from when you're telling me your story.
Great advice. Great advice. I mean, what it boils down to is just integrity, honesty, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm glad you asked about the lawyer situation, because there are cases pending at various courts where people have said, well, there was one particular case in which a grandfather or someone had said, oh, just stay here illegally. It's okay. You can fix it. And then that is encouraging somebody to do something illegal. And so these cases that are pending, and I forget where they are because I haven't heard anything recently, it gives pause for lawyers to, how are you advising people? And so I am reminded to check about that, but there are occasions in which lawyers can get into trouble about those things.
Well, Well, in the case of hypothetically my mother-in-law, omitting a detail like that from you, and you know didn't know, and you signed, hey, to the best of my knowledge, is there something to protect lawyers, something in place to protect lawyers, because of the fact that, I mean, I'm sure, are you guys able, well, you might be able to, I'm not sure, but are you guys able to actually go and look at records?
Um, it depends. I mean, I typically will trust my client. You
Mhm.
know, somebody has hired me to help them, and I trust that they're telling me everything to the best of their ability and knowledge. And so I am a very trusting person, I suppose, so I don't go and check their backgrounds. But I guess maybe some people could. But yeah, the government does an FBI background check, and those can be 50 pages long. Who's in your family? What do they earn? Do they have criminal convictions? And there's a very similar but less comprehensive version that somebody can pay $200 for to get that background check. I've never done that, or maybe on one or two occasions in problem scenarios where I asked the client to get it so that we can see what the government has. But generally speaking, I don't think lawyers would get into trouble for that. But what is interesting is, I was going to say something. I have seen scenarios where there was one particular case in which I was hired towards the end of the process before an interview, and the husband wife came to me, and it was my very first time experiencing this. We went to an immigration interview, husband and wife, and they took us to a room I'd never seen before. And I later learned it was a fraud investigation room. And they kept this couple in the same room, but they kept asking these questions. Have you met her family? Have you met his family, to each other? It turned out that they had suspected it was a fraudulent marriage.
Hmm.
And, when this background check happens, part of the background check is who's living where? How many addresses do you have? And if you're living at address A for the immigration purposes, and we find address B, but US citizen is living with somebody else, they will start investigating that. They also investigate social media to see, are you, pledging to be married? And I used to give this example before same-sex marriages were allowed, but are you, professing husband-wife marriage on paper, and then, having a same-sex partner on social media? Then that's not true. What is the truth? So different scenarios can happen, and I again have to trust my client to tell me the truth so I can represent them the best of my ability. What's important is a bit like a doctor. You've got to tell the doctor everything that's happening with you, otherwise the doctor can't diagnose it. Similarly, I
Great
can't,
analogy.
I can't fix your problem if you are leaving some stuff out.
That's a great analogy. That's yeah, that's a great analogy. All right. All right. So I am out of questions today. I
You
and you've
asked
done a great job answering every single one of
But
them.
thank you. And people should know you didn't tell me these questions. I think it's really important that what you asked me today, I hope everybody gets to hear it, and I will share it widely. Um, it's really, really important to know immigration is not easy at all. And that problem at step 2 and figuring out at step 6, oh my goodness, so many situations have happened in that way. And I'm so glad you asked these. If you don't mind, I'd love for your listeners and viewers to know that I have a book coming out.
Hmm.
The book is coming out on July 13th. The date could change just a little, maybe a week later potentially, but it's called The Startup Visa. This is the first edition of the book. I
Let
don't
me bring this here.
my lighting isn't great, but my book is The Startup Visa, and the second edition, it would be a blue cover, will be out on July um, uh, 13th. But and I'm on Amazon and everywhere. It's really good for businesses that are hiring people, or people who are starting companies, who are international startup founders. And then I have a podcast called Tahmina Talks Immigration. And I currently have a new series that just launched last week to go with the book called The Startup Visa. And I have 2 columns in national publications, Above the Law. And today, at some point, I'll have my debut article in Entrepreneur magazine. So
Wow.
I'm really excited about that. It took a long time to get to this stage, so I haven't seen it. I keep refreshing the page, but it will be out. I do have a blog that I maintain on my website at watsonimmigrationlaw.com/blog, so people can find out up-to-date information from there. So thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really grateful.
The pleasure is all mine. It's all of the information that you just stated, we will definitely have in the description. So you guys make sure you check the description, and also on netbuilders360.com, you'll also be there too. So they'll be able to check and see all of these. I can't wait for the book to come out. So you guys make sure that you go get it. I can't wait to see it myself. And that what issue are you going to be in the Entrepreneur magazine?
Yeah, I'm entrepreneur. I'm writing a regular column, and so it's going to come out today sometime. So I'm so grateful you had me on the show today. It's all sort of universe made it work out.
Oh, that is great. That is great. All right. So, what should be the biggest takeaway that everyone takes away today?
I think for today's conversation, compliance. Make sure that whatever rules and regulation that your business has to abide by, make sure you know what they are. Make sure you have your own checklists and systems. And if it's immigration law, you know where I am. I'd be happy to help.
Thank you. And thank you again so much, Tahmina, for being on here today. You brought so much value to not only me, my audience, and I can't wait for this episode to air. It's going to be amazing. So,
Grateful.
until next time, Net Builders, we'll see you then.
Thank you.